morning. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. How is it? How are you? Good? Cool. Well, welcome to a very special Insight Sunday. I would like to start today by inviting you all to join me in an acknowledgement. We acknowledge with gratitude that we're gathered together today on the unceded territory of the Montaukett, Manhasset, and Shinnecock nations, with continued gratitude and respect for the ancestral spirit of this land, and we move forward. I have the honor of introducing our speaker. It's honestly a very honor and privilege to work with Samuel Havens. Just from the colleague perspective, he grounds us. He's always chilling. Everything is great. He stays even kilter with everything. I'm gonna say it. He would like to have a pirate ship one day, so now accepting applications for crewmates. But truly, Sam is a one-of-a-kind human being, and I personally am very grateful to know him, and I know that I can speak for the rest of the staff here. We're very grateful to work with you, Sam. He's also, as a printmaker, extraordinary. As an educator, he's extraordinary. His attention to detail, both in work and the art, is extraordinary. And in short, please welcome the extraordinary human being, Samuel.
Thank you everyone for coming out. I'm really excited to have you all here. I'm very, very excited to be able to share a little bit more insight into my work and my process. I've been here at the church for almost 4 years now, but I kind of feel like I just dropped out of nowhere and ended up in Santa Barbara. And everyone in this community is so welcoming that I immediately just felt like family. I have a lot to go into today about the background of my work, how I ended up here, and a lot of it is the reason why I ended up here in Santa Barbara, what brought me to printmaking. And so that's going to be kind of the first portion of the talk. And then I'm going to dive into the process. So today we're going to be talking about copper etching. This is Dusk Haze 2020, published in 2026. I have it up here on the big screen, but the actual etching itself is an inch and a quarter by an inch and 3/4. So for everyone else's sake, I put it up here so you can actually see what I'm talking about, but I would recommend coming on afterwards and just taking a look at it. This is a copper etching. For anyone who isn't familiar with what an etching is, traditionally they are created by using a chemical process to essentially create a line into a piece of copper, which will then hold ink. This is just a little test plate here, which I'll get into later in the talk, but it's basically just it's a line in the copper and it holds ink, and when you put it through the press, it creates an image. So this was a plate that I worked on, specifically wanted to do as much with one plate as possible. Anyone who's taken workshops with me knows that I work on double drops and triple drops, composing an image through multiple passes of the press. But for this one, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to use just one plate and try and translate as much imagery into one single pass through the press as I could. And so, as you can see, I have varying colors in here. I had some blue leading down into pink, and this kind of dark gray, almost black. Yes, that's what we're looking for. Kind of, I can't remember the word. But a silhouette, that's what it is. Silhouette of the power lines kind of extending and coming out. And I really loved working with this here. And power lines are something that has been very prevalent in my work for the past few years now. And it's something that I've really begun to explore. A lot of my work has just been centered around these things that you encounter in every day to day. You see power lines almost everywhere you go, especially out here, but you never really pay attention to it. It's not something that you're ever drawn to. It's not something that you ever really think twice about. Especially, I grew up on Long Island, so they've always just been there. Never given that much thought to them. They fascinate me. In the past few years, I really started to dive into them. And it all began for me when I was driving across the country. I went to Nebraska in October of 2021. I had recently graduated. I graduated in the spring of 2021. I went to the Simeone up to upstate New York. That's where I had my education. I was the first group of BFA students to ever graduate from there. There was myself, I think, 3 other students. And it was a privilege to be able to do that, but following coming off of Oneonta, and that's where I discovered my love of printmaking, I needed to get away. I wanted to go somewhere else. We were technically still going through COVID, everything was still kind of shut down. And I had just spent my last year and a half of college online classes. I had a virtual graduation. It was very exciting, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I worked the entire summer, and then I decided I was going to take a road trip. I was going to go somewhere, I was going to get away. I wanted to get away from everybody, I wanted to get away from everything. And I couldn't think of a better place to do that than Nebraska. And I have never met a single other person who's ever had that same thought. But it was a really interesting experience. I drove all the way over there, and I started my journey coming in over here, just off the outskirts of Omaha. And there was a little nature preserve up there that I wanted to get to. I was like, that'll be a good introduction to driving into Nebraska and see what we had. And I got there, and the first day and a half, I went to the preserve up there, and I started driving down. And this was all along I-80, which is the interstate that runs through. And probably anyone who's been through Nebraska, it's the only road that you've ever been on. And there's a good reason for that, because you probably don't want to spend any more time there than you have to. But I got here, and as I'm passing through the first day, just driving on I-80, thinking to myself, I have made a major mistake. What am I doing here? Why did I come here? This is terrible. This is not at all what I was expecting the prairie. I wanted to see the plains. I wanted to see the open horizon, everything that was out here, and just the absolute nothingness. And so after passing through Lincoln, I ended up going up to, I think it's Highway 34, which runs adjacent to I-80. It's a few miles north, so you can't actually see the highway. The highway is out of sound, and that's where the trip really began. From there, I traced across, still following I-80, and then I really went off the rails. I decided I was just going to go straight through the middle. I wanted to see what was out there. I had such a great time just driving across this empty road. It's all one-lane highways once you get off of I-80, and there is nothing else out there. It's you, and it's the power lines. You're driving full speed. Maybe you pass another car every 50 to 60 minutes. There is literally nothing out there. And so I took all these film cameras with me when I went out, and I photographed the pasture, the prairie, everything that I loved about it. And the one thing that really drew my attention was these power lines. In almost every picture that I took out there, in one instance or another, there's power lines that stretch across the horizon. And you're out there, and there's nothing. You can look for miles in any direction. All you see is the flat landscape, but these power lines trace the horizon. And it inspired me. I just felt drawn to them as I traversed the state. There's so many power lines everywhere you look. On occasion, there's these arrow motors out in the farmers' fields, but people have ranches. Ranches, wherever their houses are and their farms are, it's set so far back from any of the roads that you can see. So it's just you. It's just you out there, and it's such a beautiful landscape. It's definitely not for everyone, but this is where my inspiration for this piece in particular came from. These power lines that just jut across these open lands, connecting people, and there's nothing else out there. It's such a rudimentary way of achieving this is to just put a stick in the ground and attach a wire across it and have it run across the country. It's such a fascinating concept that it's still such a staple of rural America. All down the roads and all down the highways. Dirt roads, single lane roads across rivers. This, I think, was the only color picture that I took. Interstate 34, power lines, cornfields, all of it. When I returned, I got back from Nebraska. I went a little bit further. I drove all the way out to Colorado. I came down through, drove out to Wyoming, came down through Colorado, and then came in on the way back. And following that experience, I felt enlightened. I felt like there was just a shift within me. When I went out there, I didn't know what I was looking for. And I had no idea what I was going to find. But when I got back, I just felt like I felt so much brighter. I felt happier. I felt like a better person overall. And following this, I think was 2022. So I think this was in the spring of 2022. I got back from my trip in 2021. This was a monotype that I created. And I didn't really have anything in mind. I was just drawing from my experiences out on the road, out on the prairie. And this monotype, it's about the size of one of these here. Very, very small. And I printed it on my tiny press. But this image has stuck with me for the past 4 years now, going on 5, where I love this print. And this particular print, I'm no longer in possession of. This was exhibited at a show in Brooklyn in 2022, and I put it up there alongside some other etchings and things. And I love this print. I would love to take it back with me. But this person came up to me and they looked at it and they said, was this in Nebraska? I was like, yes, I have no idea how you know that. I don't know how you gathered that from this small amount of information. And she told me that she grew up in Nebraska. She lives in New York City now, and she's like, I really want to purchase this piece from you. I couldn't have it buy it. It's like the fact that you were able to recognize this as being the landscape in Nebraska, you need to have this. This was, for some reason, this encounter just happened to come about, and you need to have this print. I wish I did. I wish I still had it. But, and I actually didn't even know I had a photo of this until a few days ago. I was looking through archives, trying to find it, trying to see if I had any recollection of this piece, because I didn't know how important this was going to be to the rest of my process as I moved forward. Before starting to work with these images of power lines, I was really most interested in architecture and infrastructure. Buildings, bridges, these behemoths of modern technology, modern engineering. And this was just something that was so different than that. It started off as just a little monotype. It was actually done with washable markers on a piece of plexiglass. It was not ever meant to be archival. It was not ever meant to be anything more than just a fun little exercise. Just having fun with it, printing something on my mini press. And the way that it built from there and just took off is something that I'm still marveling at. From there, I've created hundreds of these. This is a selection of them, but I have hundreds of them. Each of them trying to capture that same spirit, that same feeling that I created in that person. And I'm still on the journey. I don't think I've quite achieved it yet. With each one, I got a little closer, a little closer. And these are all just the size of credit cards. Credit cards are smaller. And it's this image of the power lines. It's something, being able to draw a scene in such a small amount of information. I can pull together an entire setting, an entire scene with just a few marks on a very, very small piece of paper. And I work on a very small scale. Anyone who knows me and my work knows that I work tiny. As you can see, I work very, very small. I think there's something incredibly intimate about being able to really come up close and have a moment with the work versus being able to just have it up like this. It's nice to see things on a large scale. There's something so much more powerful about really connecting with it. These works, as I said, I printed on my tiny press. After I graduated from Oneonta and halfway through Oneonta, COVID shut everything down. I lost access to a studio, I lost access to a press. I went through every possible configuration of trying to print my plates by hand. I was printing with a metal spoon. The spoon would get so hot that I would actually burn my finger because it was putting out so much energy, so much friction. And there were all these different ways that I tried to do things, trying to figure it out, and eventually I found this. And this is from a company in Germany. It's called Open Press Project. And they 3D print these mini presses. And this was exactly what I was looking for. I have complete control over this the same way I do over this press or a press downstairs. It functioned the same exact way, all the same fundamentals. And so I realized, I was like, well, I can just work small. I can continue printing, even though I don't have a full studio, I don't have access to a true press. I can continue just by working small. And my work shrunk down drastically. Prior to that, I think the smallest thing I worked on was probably like 5 by 7 inch copper plate, which is still a small etching, but not nearly this small. And there's something about working on a small scale. You have to be very aware of all of your marks. Every single mark that you make is going to hold a lot of it. It's going to take a significant portion of your composition. When you're working on something that's this small, you need to be very precise. There is no room for error. It's just something that I absolutely loved. The particular piece, this print here, it was inspired by this photograph, which is not from Nebraska. This is actually driving down Scuttle Road just before dusk. And the imagery, it's just when I drove through, it was taken this October, funny enough, 5 years is my trip. And when I was driving down, this was just a few days after daylight savings had started. So the sun was setting early. And I pulled over, I had to get a picture. There's something about it that just brought me back to my experiences driving through the plains. And that this was right here, right around us this whole time. Key difference is that there are much more power lines on these than needs to be in Nebraska. One's Nebraska or literally just one wire running across. There is much more of a population out here, so much more demand. But that silhouette, and even here you can see Long Island is relatively flat, but just this moment of working, it brought me back to that experience, and I knew that I had to translate this into a print. I just felt so inspired by it, and I had, just from this image alone, it gave me my inspiration. I had a vision in mind that I wanted to complete this across one plate. I didn't want anything else. I didn't want to have to worry about double drops. I wanted to translate this image into a much, much smaller scale, which was a challenge in itself. There's something about bringing a large photograph, a larger image, shrinking it down, taking out the unnecessary information. I can't overload this piece because there's not enough room. If I go too much, it's going to destroy the work. If I do too little, then you're not going to be able to get that same feeling, that same sense out of it. That's where the inspiration from this came from. Up here at the end of the talk, I have all of my local monotypes of power lines, as well as some of the original film photographs from my time in Nebraska, which I definitely recommend people come up and check out. But this is what led me to. I'm so pleased with how this piece came out. It's really, really exciting. That's the inspiration for the work, but what's really fascinating about my process is the etchings themselves. So I work with a process called electrolytic etching, and I can guarantee you that this is unlike any other etching method that you've ever encountered, unless you personally work with me, which you will have. But this process, it doesn't use acid. Traditionally, when you're working in a print studio, you're working with either ferric chloride or nitric acid, which are very harmful. Nitric acid is very, very different. That's what I worked with in college, because we had a proper studio that was outfitted for this. You need a very specific room to work in, where you have a hood, an acid hood that will vent the air out so that you're not breathing this in. This process, you don't have to deal with any of that. It's a remarkable process. And the way that it works, I have a small setup here. Basically, with a normal etching, you're putting your plate, you're exposing areas of copper that are going to be eaten away too. And that's what's going to give you your lines. And that copper is destroyed by the acid. It's eaten away, it dissolves into the solution. This process operates in an entirely different principle. That the copper isn't destroyed, it simply moves from one plate to another. So when it's in the solution, this is the plate that we're etching. This is called our anode. And we're going to deposit that copper into something else, which is called our cathode. When you hook these two plates up to a power supply and get them into a solution of copper sulfate, you're able to achieve this. And this process, it sounds very high-tech, but it's been around since 1804, I think, when electroplating was first brought about. And electroplating was first invented, I wrote the name down. Luigi Brugnatelli, and it was invented, he was a French chemist, and he invented this process of electroplating. And Napoleon didn't like it. So Napoleon literally just shut it down, and the process was forgotten about. Napoleon didn't want poor people to be able to electroplate their metal with gold. That somehow was being a height of luxury, and so he just put a full stop to it. The process was forgotten about for 20, 30 years or so until it was picked up again. And this is just the process of electroplating, of plating something with metal. Not like this, but it's the same principle. Funny enough, one of the first things that electroplating was used for was actually electroplating copper printing plates. Copper is a relatively soft metal, and so the more you print it, the more it will break down. Over hundreds of prints, if you're editioning 300, 400 works from a single plate, that image will deteriorate over time. But if you electroplate it with something like iron, which gives it a much stronger surface, you can print thousands of them. And so, funny enough, we've come full circle. This began with the printing, with the plating of printing plates, and now this process I'm using to etch the plates themselves. This process, as I said, is not something that's new, but using it for etching is a relatively recent development. I think people have been doing this since around the 80s. I'm not the inventor of this process. It has been around, but there are very few people who actually do this and who use it in their day-to-day processes. I had to compile this from research from a few other people. Cedric Green in the UK, Alfonso Ruggiero based in Spain, and Bernard Kosianik, I was going to put some trouble with the pronunciation, who's based in Austria. And they are three printmakers who have delved into this process. And it's something that's really fascinating. Worldwide, there's literally 3 people who have research that they've been willing to share with other people to learn this. And so just going through their notes, reading everything, trying to figure this process out for myself, I had so many failures. So many failures. They give you a lot of information, but there's so many variables that go into this process that I probably spent the first 3 or 4 months just ruining copper plates. I wasn't getting as crisp as an etching as I wanted. I couldn't get my optics to work. I was having all these different issues. And it just took tenacity. It took me wanting to keep going and keep proceeding because I don't have anywhere that I could have a full etching setup with acid. It's terrible for you. It's terrible for the environment. And so I was devoted. I was going to find a way that I could make this work, especially here at the church. Absolutely can't have that in space. So I'm going to find a way that I can bring a non-toxic printmaking method here that I can share with the community. So I really dove into this fully, and since then, I presented one Intaglio workshop here a few years ago for adults. Most recently, I did a 3-day intensive with some high school students, which their works are actually on view downstairs, so they can talk. Also recommend checking that out. But back to the process, we begin with just a piece of copper. And the very first thing we need to do with our copper, we get the plate, we need to polish it. This is a much larger plate, but this was after I finished polishing it down. I got a mirror finish. Rarely ever get mirror finish because it just takes so much more work. But so we want our copper, we want the surface to be very, very smooth because when we ink it up, any little lines in there will hold ink. If there's any little scratches, anything from the machining process, that will hold ink when we get the final print. So it just begins by scraping down your edges, beveling them down so they're smooth, and then polishing the copper so it's nice and shiny. The second step in creating etching is to coat your plate with some sort of ground so that you have something to protect the copper. The ground that I work with, I usually use 2. One of them is acrylic based, and this is acrylic floor polish mixed with just black ink just to give it a little bit of color. That is one on this plate here. The other one that I work with is Baldwin's ink ground, which was conceived of by Andrew Baldwin based in Wales. And this is an ink-based ground. The acrylic ground is really nice to work with because it goes on very easy. If you're re-etching plates, meaning plates that already have lines in them, applying the acrylic ground allows it to rework into the lines, protecting them. The Baldwin's ink ground has to roll on the plate with rare, and then you actually have to bake it in an oven for 6 minutes to set the ground. That one is really good for first etch when you're just making those initial lines, but then it becomes increasingly difficult to build those lines back in the ground as you continue to etch. So usually I'll work with it. But here's my plate, and now this has been coated in the ground, and I'll let cure on a hot plate for about 15 to 20 minutes. After that, I can put my image onto the plate. So this is a picture of this etching here. I have the ground on there, and I've scribed in, and I've drawn out my composition of what I want to print. I've exposed the copper in those areas so that my etching will bite into the plate, and it will give me a groove or a line that will hold the ink when I print it. And now also you can see on here, I have this strip up here. And now this is specific to the etching process. When I go back, we need something to connect our electricity to. So onto my etching on the back, I just put a contact strip, which is another piece of copper, and it's raised up, and I have a little section at the top where I can put my sheets of beads. That is just, it's a scribe. You can do it with a nail, you can do it with a dart, you can do it with pretty much anything. I have just a tool that I got at Home Depot, actually. I don't think I have it up here. They make specific etching needles for making, but in my experience, I've had sharper and cleaner lines just with a tool that you can get at Home Depot. Anything with a point on it, even a nail can work as a scribe. It doesn't take a lot of pressure. You don't have to push it to the metal because we're just removing that very little top layer of the acrylic that etching is. It's a chemical process that's etching the plate, so we don't need to give it a lot of force. So on my contact strip, I put some vinyl on there just to protect it from etching that part. And from there, I decide how long I want to etch it. The longer something is in the etching pad, the darker the lines will be. These are some test plates. This is a line etch here going from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes. You don't see as much variation up there. I have that print up here as well. You can see something that's in there for 10 minutes is not nearly as dark as something there for 60 minutes. And it's a similar principle of working with an aquatint, which gives you tone. So this is done in increments of 5 minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, so on. The longer you leave something in the etching pad, the darker, the deeper the lines will be. So taking that into account, I can decide how long do I want to etch my plate for, how dark do I want these lines to be, how deep do I want them to be. For this print, I wanted to create this feeling of kind of a haze. When you're driving, especially, you notice it out here as well. You're driving past these farm fields when the dust's just suspended in the air. Everything gets this kind of gray feeling. So I didn't want quite a full black. I ended up, I think I ended up going aquatint in the range of 35 minutes, 35 minutes or so. When the etching is in process, this is what it looks like. It looks really wild. And I have a small setup up here. I'll just throw a couple plates in just to give you a sense of how it works. But basically, we're etching with electricity. Ions are moving, they're dissolving from our plate that we want to etch on, and they're redepositing on the cathode. And the amount of electricity that we're etching with, we are etching with 0.5 volts, which you put a 5-volt battery in your smoke detector. So it's a fraction of that even, and the amperage that it's putting out, it's not enough to penetrate your skin. So if I were to turn my power supply on, and if I touch these, I don't even feel a shock. It's such a minor amount of electricity running through here that it's not harmful to me. This was a picture taken during the student workshop just a few weeks ago, and so I had multiple baths set up, multiple power supplies going, so you could have etchings going at once. And this is something that you can't achieve in every blueprint studio I've been to has 1, maybe 2 places that you can etch. And the bath that you need to put your acid in has to be a very specific place. You have to really pay attention to what you're working with, otherwise the acid will just eat through it, pull through your bin, through your table, through your water. With this, you don't have to deal with any of that. So my etching tanks are serial containers. They are just big enough to fit the 8x10 plates that I was working with, and they were absolutely perfect for that procedure. When it comes out of the bed, this is what my plate looks like now. You can still see the ground, it's that kind of darkish gray along the outsides there. Now the copper is much more pronounced where it's going to eat away and have some shine to it. So after I have my completed etching, I need to clean the rest of the ground off. I need perfect ground I can clean off with just ammonia. Ammonia and water I usually use about 75% water, 25% ammonia mix, and just spray it on the plate. Take a soft brush and it'll clean right off. Once it's been cleaned off, we need to prepare for our printing. So this is where I'm going to dive into more about this process here, the actual print itself. But we begin by degreasing our plates. We want to make sure that our plate doesn't have any excess grease on there, and our hands have grease on there. So please get greasy. If it's not degreased, it won't pull in properly, and you will not get the print that you want out of it. Get that sort of color, a little spotty from experience. We degrease. I use whiting, which is this powder here. It's calcium carbonate, which is also tungsten. And I also use soy sauce, just regular soy sauce. There are some people who degrease with ammonia water, there are some people who degrease with vinegar. I've tried them both, and soy sauce, in my experience, works by far better than vinegar. And somebody told me this, it's like a fun fact one day. I was working in the studio, and I realized I got my ammonia water. And I was like, you know what, I'm not running out of the store. I think I ran out of it. I'm not running out of the store, but I think I had soy sauce. He goes, let me go see if this actually works. And so I pulled it out and I worked with it, and it worked so much better than anything else I've ever used. And it's everywhere. You can grab it anywhere. I have these little to-go ones that I have from Send that are the shape of little fish. I bring them with me as my little travel set. But so just the soy sauce and the whiting, and what we do, we work it into the plate so it creates this kind of a piece. And as it works across the plate, it will remove the grease. The way that it cuts in, it gives you a nice clean plate. And so when you're done degreasing, if you pour water over the top of it, you'll see it flow right across the edges. If there's still grease on the plate, it'll kind of beat up a little bit. You'll be able to tell right away. Once it's been degreased, our plate shines. It really shines. You see it in person. I have up here actually took care of my degreasing prior to this. Watch do that. It really shines. It's really such a beautiful process. So I'm going to actually be printing this plate for you here. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what that process entails. The very first part of that is that I want to soak my paper. When we print this on the press, I want the paper to be damp. That's going to allow the paper to really form to the shape of the plate, pushing itself into all those little grooves that are holding ink. And so I have a little water bed set up back here. So I'm going to pop these in. I usually let it soak for 10 to 15 minutes or so, especially with these smaller pieces of paper. You can get away with less than that. For larger pieces, like full size, 22 by 30 inch plates, piece of paper, I would say no less than 10 to 15 minutes. The paper that I'm going to be printing on is Honolulu copper plate, which is really fine handmade German paper. It's really a pleasure to work with. And yeah, I'm just going to let that soak while I start to work through the rest of the process. Inks that I'm going to be using, these are Cranfield. These are Cranfield traditional etching inks. These are oil-based. And when we do our workshops here downstairs, we work with the Cranfield Safe Wash inks. Those clean up with just Dawn distilled and warm water. These traditional inks, these are really good. So these don't quite clean up that easily. They actually clean up, you can just use vegetable oil. Oil dissolves in oil, and so you can use that and then clean the rest of it off. So, but these inks are really fantastic. These are by far my favorite to work with. They're handmade in the UK, and they actually print each of the colors on them, printed from the plate. They then stick onto the containers and other boxes, which is just a little fun fact. For inking up the plate, and now I'm going to walk you through this, and then I'm actually going to do it up here. But since the plate is hanging and no one will be able to see it, I wanted to get this sense of what I'm actually doing. So I have all my inks mixed up here. I have my black, and this is going to be the first round of inking. And this is going to be just getting into those grooves, holding ink in those lines where I've scribed out where my power lines sit. So I'm going to start to jump into that now. So here, so that I can continue talking as I go through this. And as mentioned, I've already degreased my plate, so it's nice and shiny. I'm going to take some tape, and I'm just going to give myself a little spot where I can put it down, where I can ink it up, where it will stay. Just bring a little tab out of tape, take my plate, and pop it on there. And now I can begin my inking process. I have some black ink that I have mixed up over here, and as you can see in the pictures, as I'm inking, I'm taking my tool. For this, I have a squeegee, but you can also just use some backboard. I'm taking it, I'm getting some ink on it, zigzagging it across the plate. I want to make sure that every little crevice is holding ink, every little spot on the plate. And when I finish, it's going to look like that picture on right there. So I'm going to take my squeegee, and it's such a small plate that requires a minuscule amount of ink. Squeegee of this size is going to leave overkill. So, Alright, great. I have that plate inked up. Now I can proceed to the next step, which is removing the excess ink. So right now, my plate up here looks like this image on the right, and it is covered in it. Now I need to wipe away all the excess. I really want the ink to sit in those grooves that are holding ink, and so I begin by just wiping away. And I usually use paper and just by twisting my wrist, you can see the ink starting to come off. So, everywhere on the surface, I'm just going to lightly wipe away. Making sure to apply even pressure. I don't want any one area to be holding less ink than any other. And it's it's a bit of a tricky skill to learn. It definitely takes some practice. One of the biggest things that you see a lot of times people that are just starting to print is overwriting or underwriting. The more you do it, the more you get a feel for what the blade needs to look like, the way that the ink is kind of gripping the paper as you flip. And it's such a small plate that my surface wipe is just about time. That should be pretty perfect. And my plate has been inked out. All of these little crevices, little lines of holding ink, and it doesn't look that different. This isn't a particularly deep etching, so you're not really seeing the black on it. Right. This is a picture I took after I had inked it up. What you can see on here, however, is how much ink these edges are holding. And if I were to print this right now, it's going to be a mess. I'm going to have black water all the way around my edges. I pride myself on having very clean edges. So when I started working out here in Sag Harbor, I was assistant to Master Printmaker Dan Weldon, who I'm sure many of you know. And I met him at a yard sale, and he told me to meet him at a yard sale. I met him at this yard sale, and I had no idea who he was. I'd never met him before. I figured I would bring my portfolio just in case he wanted to see some of my work. And I pulled it out, I laid it out in the back of my truck, and he looked at my work and he said, "Edges are really clean." Thank you very much. Myself on. Spent a lot of time on the edges now because I really want the emphasis to be on the print itself. I don't want anyone's attention to be drawn to the edges. If there's a little spot of black on the edge and that's what becomes the focal point, that's going to ruin the composition. It's going to take away from what I want the piece to be. And so I'm pretty meticulous with my wiping of edges. I just go around taking a blue pen and just wiping, not with a lot of force. Pressure, just consistently. You can see as I go around, all this ink is being held on the edges. Edges are pretty clean. In the process, I have gotten a little bit more ink on the surface of the plate. That's just kind of happens. I get so I'm going to take my paper and just polish up the edges where there's spills. So now my plate is all inked up. I have all my edges, and now I have the first part of this done. This is going to give me black lines. If I were to print this right now, this is what it would look like. This was the first test proof that I did with this plate after etching, just to get a sense of the lines, how they're going to print, what the composition is, if this is an image that I want to move forward with, or if I want to scrape it down and kind of restore. I was very, very pleased with how this came out, but I did this first print very quickly, so you can see my edges were not quite as good as that. But we live and we learn. So, just having PTSD.
professor since I'm his student as well.
Beautiful thing about having an action like this is you can put multiples of them. So these were some just small addition that I did on handmade paper that I gave out as Christmas gifts this year. Really great. Each one of them is from the same edition. I ended up with an edition of 20, and this was on handmade paper that I made during a workshop that we had here at Cape and Pomeranz. So previous workshops. I think we're going to have her back in the summer actually. Workshops. Highly recommend. Now, if I were to have printed that, I would need to clean up my plate. Because now I'm going to have second color. And so I'm getting down, like going through the process of degreasing, inking, and then wiping, and it's here. Now I want to introduce my second color. You can see in there, which is this background, the dusk light falling in behind the silhouette. And I do that by creating a blended roll, taking two colors and a brayer and blending them together and finishing when you get this gradient blue. So for this example up here, this was actually earlier pictures than when I made the final print, but you can see I have like a light orange and a dark blue. And by taking the brayer, small one here as well, and just rolling it through them, by moving left to right, very gently, I can create that seam between them. And moving it across, I can even it out to be a little bit more smooth, as is shown there. And so that's what's going to give me that change in the horizon, the way that the dusk is falling. We still have those last rays of the sun creeping up before it fades into that dark night sky. So I have my brayer here, I have some ink that I have prepped, but I'm just going to roll it out a little bit more, just to make sure that I have some fresh ink on here. And what I'm pulling from, this looks exactly like that big swatch in the center there, blue and that one's pink. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to roll it across the surface of the plate. Now this is called a surface roll. This ink is very thinly applied onto the brayer. And so as I roll it across, it's just going to stay on the surface. That black ink that's held in our lines is going to stay where it is. This will just roll over the top. And after I roll it, it'll look something like this. You can see our lines are still in there, but now we have this passive color. I'm going to do that right here. I have to be very careful with where my blend is on here. I want it to be at a very specific spot along the horizon. So something I have to be mindful of. So now my plate looks just like that. I have all my ink on here, my edges are clean, and I might even, no, I think I'm clean. But now I'm going to go into the printing process. So, first thing I need to do is I need to set the pressure on the press, which now I did this before, but it's just coming over here and adjusting these dials. I just want to make sure that I have this at the proper pressure, and this is going to be set at 4 bars 85. On the dials on either side, you can see there's some lines and there's some numbers, so when I'm reading it 4 bars 85, I can be sure I'm at the proper pressure that I need to print at. Still all good. So the next thing I need to do now is I need to lock my paper before I start soaking it. And my hands are pretty filthy right now, so I'm actually going to put some gloves on so I don't transfer ink onto my paper. And since I'm a little limited with space, I have my blotting towel set up on the press bed right now. But basically what I'm doing, when I pull the paper out of this bag, it's going to be very, very wet. It's dripping there. And so I want to allow the excess water to drip out of it. You can see that it's very wet. It's glinting in the light. You can see how much here. So I don't want my paper to be that damp for printing. So I'm going to take it over to the press bed over here. I just have a towel set up back here, just a regular towel. And I fold it over the top, and I'm going to use my hands to. I'm going to take my hands and just
smooth it out, just allowing the excess moisture to absorb into the towel. So when I pull it up, my paper is still damp. If I were to touch it, it's damp, but it's no longer glinting in the light. It's not flaking that noise. And this is the perfect place that you want it to be at. So I'm going to move my towel, just put it down here for now. I'm going to take my plate, and I'm going to bring it over to the press bed. I'm just going to line it up here. I'm going to take my damp paper and I'm going to lay it down on top. I'm going to try to even it out as best as I can. I don't have a registration grid set up for this, but I'm just going to pop it down right on top. I'm going to lower my blankets on the press. And now I'm going to run it through, and when it comes out the other side, we will have our completed image. So when the plate goes through, you can see that there's much more force going through. It took me a second to kind of regain strength to push it through. Just it's putting out a tremendous amount of force, a tremendous amount of pressure. And around the edges of the plate, you get this embossment on the side. When I pull it up, now I have which there it is. So these colors, I didn't get as quite a pink on this one as I had on my initial one, but that's just me fooling around with pinks. This was some stuff that I prepped this morning, so just a quick little print, but this gives you a sense of the process. Now, one more thing that I wanted to do was to actually reprint this same plate.
So I had my first print, but there's still ink that's being held on that plate there. And so I was experimenting with this a little bit yesterday, printing the ghost. And so I have a idea to build up a composition of ghost prints, which is to print 3 successive times on one piece of paper with each image that's printed holding a little bit less ink. So you can see that bottom one on the right side is the first ghost, and then the second ghost, and the third ghost. And it's just successive printing, each one holding a little bit less. And I have this idea to have it be a piece where it shows it kind of coming in from nothing, fading into this more finalized work. So to prepare for that, I drew up a registration grid, which this is exactly where my plate is going to go as I move it through. As you can see, it's the same exact size of the plate, so I'm just going to do, when I lay this out, I want to have the darkest of the bottom, so I'm making 1, 2, 3. So I have a second piece of paper here that I'm going to prepare. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is I'm going to actually clean my press bed. Just in case there's any residue of any alcohol, on the press bed, I'm going to wipe it down. So just isopropyl alcohol, I'm going to slide my plate out the way. There's a lot of ink being held under here, so I'm glad that I cleaned this off. The worst thing that can happen is you go to print something and you realize that there's a little speck of black on the press bed that you missed, and now on your beautiful piece, there's an unwanted mark that just ruins the whole thing. So I always go through and clean it before each printing. So I have my template on here that I drew up yesterday. I already put it under the press bed. So I'm going to start with my first one.
You put all 3 on the same piece of paper.
Yes, yeah, so it's going to be 3 passes through the press. It'll be the first one. I'll pull it out, keeping the paper engaged under the roller, shift the plate up, print it again, do the same thing, shift it again, and print it, and that will give us our final image. I already have ink on these things, so I'm going to switch them out for a new pair. These traditional inks, they really love to travel. They get all over your pages. So if I don't usually work with gloves, but I don't have access to a sink here. So for the sake of keeping my hands clean and my paper clean, I am using gloves today. So, I'll take my towel for lines. Paper, let the excess rip off. Bring it over to my towel and just blot any of that extra moisture off.
want it to be damp, but not soaking wet. If it's any more wet in one area than another, it'll absorb the ink differently, and you'll be able to tell when you look at the print. You can say, like, well, the paper was too damp right there because there's a big spot where it printed a little bit lighter than the rest of it. We want to make sure that it is as even as we can possibly get it. We want everything to be perfect, or at least as perfect as we can get it. I'm going to lay this down. Here, again, I'm kind of just eyeballing the placement of my paper. I can always trim down after the fact. Lay this down. I'm going to bring my blankets down on top. And since I'm printing a ghost, some of you may remember from those of you who have taken monotype workshops that usually put the pressure down on the ghost because we want to develop off as much ink as we can. For this particular print, since I want it to fade, and that is something that I'm incorporating in the piece, I'm going to leave the pressure right where it is. So we're coming through, the other way this time. And I'm going to keep the very edge of my paper engaged up here. It's under the roller, so it's not moving anywhere. I can fold it up. And I'm going to shift my plate down, and on this next pass, that's here. Again, there's ink that's underneath my plate where it was, so I'm going to just take my little drag, my isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to wipe that down. Paper comes back down, blankets come back down, and we go back through the other way. Blankets come up, paper is still engaged, fold the paper up, you can see we are now 2 prints in, each one fading just slightly bit. I'm taking the plate once more, shift it down to this last section. Again, take my isopropyl alcohol and wipe the best bit. Make sure my plate is properly positioned. Paper comes back down, blankets come back down, and we go through once more. And this time I can go all the way out. I don't need to worry about keeping my paper engaged because this is the final printing. So when it comes off, we have 3 successive prints ranging from very, very light, very fine, delicate through the first post. So I'll leave these up here. So you can take a look at them. That is pretty much the inspiration for the work, the process used to achieve it. Some of my background and basically the history of the etching, a little bit more about this process, the electrolytic etching. And again, also up here, I have my solution. This is one of my etching tanks. It's this blue solution that kind of looks like a very deep blue Windex, as well as my power supply. And the power supply just plugs right into an outlet. I just have an extension cord running over here, but it's something that can be done anywhere that you have access to electricity. You can take a battery pack that you use to jumpstart your car, and it has a spot for an outlet on it. I can make this fully mobile. I can do this anywhere. And it's just a really amazing process. I'm sure there are going to be some questions, so I'm happy to answer anything that you have. Yes.
I know you didn't do an operative, but were you to have done? Were you to have done an operative? Would you be using a traditional rosin box and baking it onto the surface?
That is an excellent question. And that is one of the really amazing things about this process is that to achieve an operative like this, to achieve those ranges of tone, when you're working with traditional acids, you do need to have rosin. You need to have a very specific setup for applying it. The rosin is this very fine powder that you put into this operative box, rosin box. There's a fan that blows it up into the air, and And the way that each of those little specks settles on the plate, it creates this kind of pattern where it creates these millions of little divots that will etch in the plate. With this process, this is etched without anything on it. This is just the bare plate going into the tin. And the way that this process bites it, it just automatically gives you all these little lines, all these little divots. It's really amazing.
So it's almost like a skip bite or something. It's almost like direct etching.
Yeah, it's
without
similar.
without making a little dots.
Exactly. It's doing that through the process. And so we don't need to ever worry about working with rosin, which is also harmful for you. You need very specific setup for that as well. But that's one of the real benefits of working with this process. You can achieve these tones without any extra material, any extra hazard exposure to yourself or the environment. Being able to do this without having to apply any kind of rosin onto it is unbelievable. The first time that I tried this, I didn't think it was going to work. I was amazed. If I were to put just an open-faced plate into a bath of acid, it will dissolve the entire plate. The whole thing will be eaten away. This works in a completely different manner, and it just automatically gives you those little dots. So on my finished print, there are some areas on here where it would typically be considered an open way. Some of this down here, if I were to have that same etching and put it into a bath of nitric acid, it would eat away at these areas, but these are exposed here. So what would happen is all of this would just sink into the plate. This entire section would be at one level, and this where it wasn't etched would be at another. The way that the process works, I can leave these areas open. I can scribe into them, covering all of this in one go. Etch it for, they said I think I did 30 minutes or so, giving me that great tone, not having to worry about that.
And would you be able to use, or would you use a mesotent rocker on the ground that you are using to build ground? If you wanted to do a mesotent?
If I wanted to do with mesotints, you actually don't use any kind of ground on them. So the mesotint is done by just taking the rocker and rocking it across the plate. And so it gives all these little teeth on the copper that will hold the ink. So mesotints you get such a beautiful velvety black. But there's actually no ground used in those. So that's another technique that we use to treat a plate without working against it.
I know this is way technical, but when you're doing a blended roll, do you always just roll in one direction? I'm just curious, because I worked with this woman who used a really gigantic roll, and she would always go back and forth and back. I was just curious.
It depends on the size and what I'm working with. This is such a small brayer that I really only need a 4-inch space. So even by just moving it 4 inches, I can allow the brayer to roll. And I do usually go back and forth. I'll change this orientation going up and down, just to ensure that the brayer is getting a smooth roll. And I don't, that way you can see there's a little bit of a line from where the edge of the plate is. You can see that line from where it rolled across the plate.
Yeah.
But other than that, I want it to be very smooth across. And so I probably couldn't see it very much because I'm working up here. I do move it back and forth, allowing it to spin in between each rotation.
And then when you apply it to the plate, it's just one pass.
Yes, usually I'll try to keep it as just one pass on there. The thing is, as you can see on here, as we get that, as it prints on here, well, it transfers, not necessarily prints, but you get that little edge of the plate. If I were to roll this across again, there is the possibility that that line could now end up on the plate. So I want to minimize that as much as possible. If I'm working on a really big plate, something much larger than the brayer that I have, I can very carefully re-ink in between each pass and continue rolling. But whenever possible, I try to do it in just one go.
Okay, and one more nerd question, which is, so is your electrolytic process for doing this essentially the same thing that would be used in steel plating?
Yes.
That's what you were
It's the same
describing.
principle, yes, yeah.
So would you use this for steel plating,
You would use a different solution. You wouldn't use the copper sulfate. It would be a different solution in there, but the same power supply, the same setup. And with the steel plating, that's how this, like I said, that's how this process began, was that they were using it to take from another metal and depositing it onto something else.
But then you'd be doing it backwards, like you'd have to put the resist in the lines and do it backwards, so you'd be distributing from where
Yes.
the energy goes back onto the plate.
Yes, and you can control that in this process. And one thing that I'm beginning to work into is using vinyl as a resist. If I were to put vinyl through a printing machine and then apply it to the plate, I can control exactly where the copper is deposited. This is a piece of copper that I've used as a cathode, which just collects the copper. And you can see the way that it builds up on the plate. Feel it on the finger across. If I were to control how it's being applied on here, if I put vinyl on, I create an image specifically with the intention of eventually printing it, only with the areas that the copper has been deposited, this is something that you can't do in any other etching process. It's
Amazing.
rare varieties.
Okay, I lied, I had one more. How big of, like, can you go so far? Because remember you were telling me about this?
Yes.
Like a year ago?
Yes.
And I was like, it was kind of dimly. Anyway, this has been a great presentation, because it's so clear. But did you solve the like large plate problem?
Yes. I have a much larger tank now that I can accommodate up to a full-size sheet of paper, which typically is 22 inches by 30 inches. So I just have a very large plate that I have. I can hold about 15 gallons of this solution. So I just have that. But on the topic of the solution, for anyone who hasn't worked with acid before, you know that the more you etch something, the more the solution deteriorates. That acid won't bite with the same potency that it once had. So you need to compensate for that. If you're etching across the course of a month, what you once etched for 15 minutes or 15 seconds, that won't be as dark as if you were to do it again in 15 seconds. You need to up that time to counteract the deterioration of the acid. This will always etch the same exact way, the same exact potency in it. As long as you have the voltage set to the silicon, you will get consistent results every single time. The solution will not deteriorate. I mixed this over 3 years ago. I'm still working with it. It is fantastic.
And then a question over here, I'm sure.
Hi, I'm not gonna ask you any technical questions at all. It's more of a kind of personal thing. How did you end up here?
How did I end up here? That's a great
This
question.
particular, at the church, I know that you have a lot of responsibilities beyond this, but how did you end up here?
It's a fascinating story. As I briefly touched on before, I ended up out in Santa Barbara first by working with Dan Lowe. And I came out here, I was in the middle of my senior year of college, everything was online, and so I was able to do my online classes, drive out to Santa Barbara, work with Dan, and then go home. And one day, I got out to his studio and he said, "Sam, we're going on an adventure." He was like, "I'm going to introduce you to April and Eric at the church." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool. I don't know who they are yet. That sounds awesome." I was like, "I'm up for it." So we get here, and April and Eric aren't here. But what is here is the press that's downstairs, and it's completely covered in rust. And he's like, "Oh, I think I was supposed to clean this up while I was here today too. How about you get started on this? I'm going to go on April and Eric." And he disappears, and I'm just down there cleaning up the press. Myself and the facilities director at the time, Tom Brokich, and together we restored it. And I remember walking out of here. This was before the church, I think before they were open to the public. I walked out of here and I was like, "Wow, that was a really cool place. Must be cool to work there." And it just kind of went on the back burner for a couple of months. After the press became operational again, we led a Printaganza, which was a monotype printing workshop facilitated by Dan. He brought myself and a few other people on as assistants. And so we facilitated that downstairs at the church, obviously at the church, facilitated that here. And then it just grew this passion for monotype printmaking out here. And there was a connection with the community that I don't know if anybody knew existed. It just took off from there. We did 2 Printaganzas here, and then one day I was a substitute teacher at OCs over in Iceland, and I got an email one day from Cece, who was the deputy director here at the time, and said, "Hey, Sam, we have a spot opening up here on the front desk. Would you be at all interested in coming on board? Like, we know that you have this knowledge of the press, and we'd love to build something into it. We've I'd love to build something like this. Would this be of interest? And I dropped everything. I dropped everything. I was like, nope, everything else is done. I have no idea where this is going to lead me. I have no idea where this is going to go. But I'm going to take this on and just go full force with this. And from there, I've been here, as I said, almost 4 years now as an official employee. I think over 5 if we go back to when I restored the press. But things just really fell together. I really feel like the stars aligned for me to end up out here. And it was such an incredible opportunity to have. Again, coming here, I really felt like I was just part of the community from day one. I grew up in Eastport, which is still the eastern end of Long Island, not quite this far east. And so coming out here, I didn't know anyone. I had friends that I worked with in Southampton previously, but they all worked in Southampton, but they all lived Long Island. And so when I came out here full time, I really didn't know anyone. I had 1 or 2 friends, and that was pretty much it. But the community out here, and everyone that I get to work with at the church, everything about it just was so inviting. I just immediately felt at home. And so to answer your question, Peter, that's how I ended up here, and that's why I've been here ever since.
I don't know if I really. Two quick last. One comment, one question. The first question: how'd you get the star?
That, I think, was just actually a little piece of dust that settled on the plate. And I was like, it does work. I was like, this is perfect. I was
Yeah,
like,
I think it's that first star. And I also like the UFO in the first photograph too. That was really weird.
that was just, I think it was because I had pulled over and I was still in my car and I just took a picture and I think the flash went on, and so that was the reflection of the flash going by windshield. But it was,
That's very cool. I also want everyone here to know that Sam has one other town. Oh, well, he has probably tens of other towns, hundreds of other towns, but one that we are very proud of is Sam is in our knitting club. And Sam is the most patient and exacting knitter. Vivian's pretty close, but Sam has been working on the same project for almost 3 years and it's been knitting. So one of these days we're going to have a whole series on just the project. The process of a project.
I mean, I feel like a lot of it goes hand in hand with the process behind this, and that everything has to be so meticulous and perfectly done, and it takes a lot of time. So when I took on that project, which eventually it has been almost 3 years now, I'm knitting a poncho, and we'll get there someday. But it's been a long-term project, but it's something that I'm committed to and that I'm going to see through. I mean, figuring out this process alone took me over 2 years to get everything fine-tuned, and I'm still in the process of taking new developments, exploring where it can lead me. But that's one thing that I'm very proud of is my tenacity, just ability to see things through to the finish. When you start something, I'm going to make sure it gets done, even if it takes me 4 years to finish it. 5 years. I think we're hoping to finish it in 6 years.
I think one of Sam's greatest gifts, we use the term, we wear a lot of hats. Sam wears a lot of hats, so he makes it look like he's only wearing one. Are there any other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Sam, thank you.